I wonder if Zach Mettenberger from LSU wishes and deep down hopes that he had come through the NFL draft process maybe about a decade ago. I wonder that. And I wonder if that's what he feels because there is no question that when you look at Zach Mettenberger from LSU, he fits that old school profile of the traditional 6'5", 225, 230-pound immobile pocket passer. And back in the 2003, 2004 range, a guy like that would be almost destined to go in the first round, if not number one overall. But heading into the 2014 NFL draft, the league is starting to change. The league is evolving, the league is changing, and the quarterback position is changing, which kind of puts Mettenberger in a kind of unique position in terms of he fits the old profile, but is he the type of quarterback that you can rely upon, that you can trust to build your franchise around and have him be a franchise quarterback for you? Now, when you look at Mettenberger, some of his positives jump off the charts at you. First and foremost, obviously, is his size, his prototype size. 6'5", legit, about 230 pounds, 225 pounds, legit again, with big hands. What that means is he's very well built. He can see over the offensive and defensive lines. He can see the throwing lanes down the field. And he's built very well, which in theory should allow him to absorb a lot of contact that would come from a 16-game NFL regular season. And his big hands would indicate that he has a good grip on the football and the ability to protect the football well, and as a result, not have a lot of the fumble problems that quarterbacks with smaller hands may have. He also has, to me, one of the strongest arms in this entire draft class. You may argue the strongest arm in this draft class. He has a hose. He has more than enough NFL arm to make all of the throws. He can make those throws into a tight window in the short and intermediate areas. He can throw the deep post very well, both putting some air on it and also having to zip it in there if he can. Same thing with the deep out. And he can also obviously stretch opposing defenses down the field vertically, being able to throw the ball 50-plus yards without any major problems whatsoever. Those are a couple of the big strengths to his game. I think he has okay field vision, not the best in this draft class, but I don't think it's terrible. At times he showed an ability to be able to go through his progressions, and not just progressions going from his primary read to his check down, but actually go 1, 2, 3, and then maybe check down. He didn't do it as consistently as you might like, but he did demonstrate an ability to do that. He also, to me, demonstrated an ability to protect the football and not take a lot of unnecessary chances. And for a guy like him, I think that's a very important thing. You don't have the capability necessarily to make huge plays with your feet and make those spectacular plays on the ground that can make up for some of those mistakes. So you have to take care of the football. You have to manage the game, if you will. And I think Mettenberger does a really good job of that and has a relatively decent understanding of situations and maybe when to take chances and when not. Now, on the flip side, some of his opportunity areas, some of his negatives, his accuracy is okay, but at times it seems to fleet a little bit. I look at him and I say, this is a guy with that type of monster arm is going to run into trouble sometimes of not understanding when to back off the velocity a little bit and using touch instead and throwing receivers open and throwing to a spot instead of just trying to wham it in there. At times you have to do that at the NFL, and I saw him be very inconsistent in that at LSU. When I look at his mechanics, his ball placement is good. His hands are very big, so obviously that helps. There's a bit of a windup, which, he's a bigger guy. That's just going to happen. But for a guy that's not incredibly mobile, a guy that's going to have to ultimately make his NFL living in the pocket, the longer that release takes, the longer that throwing motion takes, the more possibilities you have for getting hit by opposing pass rushers. It makes making quick decisions all that much more important. And at times when I saw Mettenberger play at LSU in 2013, he didn't seem to always make the quickest decisions. Kind of like a Matt Barkley last year, he seemed to at times doubt what he was seeing and not fully trust what he was seeing, which would lead to some hesitation, which would lead to double pumping and clutching the ball. And while he didn't get happy feet, he would sit there sometimes and hold the ball too damn long, which is something that you could say, I guess, a lot about a lot of those bigger immobile pocket passers. They have to understand that since they can't make those plays with their feet, they can't really consistently extend the play outside of the pocket. They have to learn that sometimes you just got to get rid of it and you got to make a quicker decision, especially with his longer release. Now, he does a good job of getting his whole body involved in the throwing motion by and large, but there are times, especially when pressure is coming at him, that he seems to abandon that a little bit and he seems to wind up even more in his throwing motion and use his lower body even less, which can lead to a loss in some velocity and the loss in some accuracy. Two biggest concerns for Mettenberger for NFL scouts and front offices and general managers heading into this 2014 whole draft process is going to be number one, durability. With a guy being 6'5", 225, 230 pounds, and not being incredibly mobile, there's always going to be that concern of he's going to take some big hits in the pocket, and is he going to be able to hold up to that? And when you look at the fact that he's coming off of a late season ACL tear and surgery, now he's on that road to recovery. It's going to be very important through the combine and through the draft process for him to look good in his physicals, for him to show that he's progressing well in his recovery. He's already lacking in some athleticism, and now he's got a major knee injury to deal with when he was already wearing a knee brace and maybe having some issues with that beforehand. So that's going to cause some durability concerns, along with the fact, like I said, that since he stands in the pocket so much, he could potentially take a lot more blows and might not be able to avoid some of those really big hits. The other issue is going to be his off-the-field stuff. There's going to be some character concerns with Mettenberger. You remember at one point in time, he was a highly recruited quarterback from Mark Richt in Georgia, and then he decided to go play grab-ass with some girl at the bar, and he ultimately got charged with some sexual assault stuff, and he got let go from the Georgia Bulldog program, and that's how he ended up coming to, after a stop at junior college, going to LSU to play for Les Miles. So there's going to be a lot of character concerns there in terms of, was this a one-time thing? Was this out of character? Or is this a guy that lacks maturity? Is this a guy that lacks the leadership and the poise and the presence that we need out of our franchise quarterback at the NFL level? Now, me being a smartass would sit there and say, hey, if he was sitting there grabbing ass and he was an NFL starting quarterback, then to me that says Pro Bowler all over him. But, at the very early portions of his career, hey, let's face it, he probably got hammered and he decided he was going to rope a girl. Probably been a lot of dudes that have done that over the years, let's face it. We don't always necessarily call it sexual assault, but it is what it is, and it will be a question and a legitimate one for Mettenberger. In terms of when you look down below at my physical tool grading scale, and like I said, I want to emphasize this again, this is not my only measure of the quarterbacks. This is just those physical, tangible things that you could see how I grade them. Like, for example, Bortles graded 1 point higher than Bridgewater, but I would still prefer Bridgewater any day of the week. I think he's a more complete, more NFL-ready quarterback than Bortles with higher upside. Keep that in mind, that the physical tools and how they grade out is not ultimately my measure of them, but it gives you at least a piece of the puzzle. It gets you a window into how I view the quarterback. So when I look at Mettenberger, I ultimately give him a grade. You look at the description box down below, of 65.5, and I gave him an NFL comparison of Carson Palmer. That's kind of the guy I see. Carson Palmer, if you remember, before he went number one overall to the Cincinnati Bengals coming out of USC in 2003, he had a lot of durability questions. He couldn't really stay healthy, and he finally did in that senior season. Mettenberger has some of those same concerns. He has some of those concerns about whether or not he's going to be able to last in the NFL because of his lack of mobility and his lack of athleticism. For a guy like a Mettenberger, if you're going to build around him and make him your young franchise quarterback, you were going to have to sit there and have a really good offensive line around him. You're going to have some wide receivers that can get open and create separation in a short order sometimes, going against opposing defenses when they blitz. Mettenberger is a prospect that I like quite a bit. I will say that. If I was sitting there and I was piecing together a big board, I would rate Bridgewater, probably Manziel, and then it would be Mettenberger ahead of both Carr and Bortles. And the reason is because I feel like he's got the NFL arm to make all the required throws. He stands very tall in the pocket. I like his accuracy a little bit better than a guy like Blake Bortles. I like his decision-making a little bit better than Blake Bortles. I think his accuracy is a little bit better than Derek Carr's. I think his field vision is a little bit better than both Carr and Bortles. When you look at a guy like Mettenberger, he's a guy, don't get it twisted, that if he wouldn't have tore up his knee late in the season, there'd be people talking about him potentially being a top 10, top 15 pick in this 2014 NFL draft. As a result, I think somebody, maybe like in Arizona in the late second round, or somebody in the third round, is going to potentially get a real steal of a quarterback here and get a guy that you can give basically an entire season as kind of like a redshirt year at the NFL level and give him time to recover. And by 2015, 2016, you could have found yourself a young franchise quarterback on the cheap that you can build your organization around. I am a fan of Mettenberger. He just needs to stop grabbing women's asses here on going forward.